Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be about how to flip the script on negative self-talk. Stay tuned. So negative self-talk is arguably one of the most toxic traits that we can have towards ourselves. We all do it. We all do it to some extent. We all have negative inner dialogue about us. Really, we are our own worst enemies sometimes, or our own biggest critics. And now really, having an inner critic isn't always the worst thing. There is a difference between realistic self-talk and negative self-talk. Sometimes this gets blended together. However, I do think that they are distinctively different. Negative self-talk is more insulting yourself, saying things like, I'm such a screw up, I'm such a failure, I'm never going to amount to anything, I'm a bad person, I'm not a good friend, no one likes me, no one accepts me. The problem with that is if we talk to ourselves like that and we think about ourselves like that, we're going to find evidence to back it up. There's this term called confirmation bias, and if we are looking for something to be true, we can almost find ways to make it true. And thanks to a cognitive distortion I talked about in another YouTube video, we can sometimes discount positives in almost every situation and only focus on the negatives. So this will validate and reinforce that negative self-talk loop. Now, realistic self-talk is looking at things under a realistic lens. Because sometimes when we set goals that are too high, they're not obtainable goals and we're not able to reach them or reach them right away, we'll attribute that to ourselves as us being a failure. So realistic self-talk can kind of feed into negative self-talk, so I can see why there is a blend there. However, being able to talk to ourselves about like, okay, what is the realisticness of this situation is different than negative self-talk. So sometimes in that way, our inner critic voice can be helpful. Is this too much for me to take on right now? Am I aiming too high? Do I need to look and modify my goals a little bit? Maybe doing this isn't such a good idea. When that inner critic becomes negative self-talk is when we see psychological problems happen. That's when we see things happening like worsening of depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, low feelings of self-worth, an external locus of control, or believing that we don't have control over our destiny, that all the control is attributed to outside factors. Plays into that feelings of helplessness that we often see with depression. It can portray you as being an insecure person, and this can really affect your relationships. It can lead to feeling a little more needy in relationships, needing more reassurance from other people. It can lead to perfectionism, because perfectionism is definitely a shield against negative self-talk. If I do everything perfectly, then there isn't going to be any need for me to criticize this. How can we stop doing this? How can we change the dialogue? The first thing is to notice that you're doing it. And you find yourself starting to spiral into a negative self-talk loop, is what I call them. Notice that that's happening. Being like, hey, well, here's my critic again. It's coming back. This can allow you to stop it before it gets too deep. Second thing is to realize that thoughts and feelings are not always reality. We always have thoughts. I don't know what the number is, but we have thousands and thousands of thoughts a day going through our brain. Whether there's evidence to actually back up a thought is a whole another story. Having this negative thought about myself, asking ourselves, is it true? What is the reality to support this negative thought can be very powerful. Also important to know that our thoughts play into how we feel. So sometimes the way that we feel is not always accurate to reality either. It doesn't make your feelings any less valid though. I do want to say that. Like, how you feel is always valid. However, sometimes it doesn't actually, your perception or the way that you're feeling the situation doesn't always actually match up to reality. So they can both be true. Really, in essence, like challenging those thoughts and catching yourself when you're in a negative self-talk loop can really help change the way you feel, because there's a relationship between what we think and how we feel. Number 3 is changing negativity to neutrality. This is a good technique to use if stopping the thoughts is not an option, it's not working, challenging the thoughts is not helping. Making our negative thoughts a more neutralized statement can be less harmful to our mental health. So saying like, I can't stand the situation, I hate this, can maybe become something like, I don't prefer this is really challenging to me. Dislike is still there, but the language is not as damaging. And this leads us to the next one, which is changing the script on negative self-talk. So starting to kind of reframe the thoughts that we're actually having or the talk that we're telling ourselves. So instead of failing in a challenging situation and saying, I'm worthless, we're gonna say something that sounds a little bit like this. This is challenging for me. I'm having a hard time with it, and that's okay. There are other things that I'm good at, and reminding yourself of what those things are. And doing this type of exercise will really, really help foster authenticity in yourself by realizing that, hey, there are things that I struggle with and I'm not good with, and there are things that I'm also good at too. Because when we're living authentically, we want to be able to embrace both things. Another way this can look is using something called bridge statements, and I believe I've talked about this in another video when I talked more about how to start loving yourself. Bridge statements are the statements that are kind of in between one of two extremes. For a lot of people, going from I hate myself to I love myself is not realistic. Bridge statements are those statements that kind of come in between those two extremes. So instead of saying I hate myself, saying something like I might not hate myself as much as I think I hate myself, or I might have some good qualities about me. Eventually, the idea is to grow the rungs of these bridge, right? So now we're kind of saying more things on the other side eventually, kind of like, hey, I might like some things about myself, or there are some things about me that might be okay. In my opinion, it's a much more realistic way to look at two different extremes of things. Last tip is to talk to yourself like you would talk to a friend. And I think I've also talked about this before in another video. But really with negative self-talk, a lot of the time, there are things that we say things to ourselves that we would never say to another person. You call your friend right now and tell them that they're an absolute failure. Probably not. So why are we saying it to ourselves? Better yet, if our friend is coming to us and saying that they feel like a failure, what are we saying back to them? No, you're not a failure. You know, this might have been something that was just really, really hard. You know, we're not perfect. There's times that we don't succeed. There's times that we mess up. It doesn't mean that the overall picture is that you're a failure. If we start talking to ourselves like that, it can really, really help with that inner negative self-critic. Really, in order to be happy and have positive mental health, we really do need to become our own best friend. So we need to start talking to ourselves like a friend. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you give it a thumbs up. It really does help support my channel. If you haven't yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button below. Subscribe to my content. I release 2 new videos every week.